Enclosing more than 18 acres and 194 million cubic feet of air, the Tropical Islands Resort is currently the largest uninterrupted volume in the world, the largest indoor water park in the world, and the container of the world's largest indoor rainforest. Located in the sparse municipality of Krausnick-Großwasserburg, 30 miles south of Berlin, Germany, the resort was built inside a former blimp hangar in 2004 and has been in successful operation since opening day. In an era marked by serious debate concerning climate change, material scarcity and the conflicts of globalization, the Tropical Islands Resort reveals a crucial link between architectural design and the public response to some of the greatest challenges facing contemporary society. As it reflects popular attitudes towards the climate, nature and culture, the existence and popularity of the Tropical Islands Resort begs the question: how has the architectural interior become a tool for aesthetic mediation in the 21st century, and what are its precedents? Chapter 1: The Bunker Bubble. Between Community and Immunity. The air we breathe, which, in the Western tradition, has long been the ethereal subject of our surroundings, our atmosphere, and our space, can no longer be described under such stable terms. Sampling from any coordinate on Earth reveals that human influence has left the air a mixed and unbalanced soup spanning continents. In response to the apparent contamination of the air, the gas mask was invented by Louis Haslet in 1849 and patented as a lung protector. The bottom half acts as an air filter for immunization, while the top half provides the opportunity for communication with the outside world. In the 20th century, the gas mask became a model for two types of the architectural interior. Those concerned about the selective weaponization of the air, as it was initially practiced in the First World War, developed architectures of pure immunization in response. Bunkers, such as J. Swayze's underground homes of 1964, were modeled after a single-story suburban home, entirely designed to distract its occupants from the potential threats of the Cold War happening above ground. But while a significant portion of the population was ready to bury themselves underground, a number of architects imagined new social ecologies suspended above the earth and sustained within vast interiors to mitigate their reliance on natural resources. A climate-controlled modern air, after all, meant potentially implementing a new system of human commerce and everyday experience, from the visual landscape to the potential new role of agriculture within society. Among the most influential was Buckminster Fuller's Cloud9 project of 1960. His intentions can be summarized by one of his own poems. To make the world work, in the shortest possible time, through spontaneous cooperation, without ecological offense, or the disadvantage of anyone. The distinction between the two interior types is a political one, between pastiche opacity and futuristic transparency, between short-term and long-term solutions, and between paranoiac individualism and ambitious communitarianism. The Tropical Islands Resort is a manifestation of the two main responses to the environmental crisis. The Tropical Islands Resort is a bunker bubble. Looking below the horizon line, Tropical Islands plays into nearly every technique of pastiche and escapism imaginable. Looking above, it can be mistaken for one of the cloud structures Fuller never dreamed would exist in his lifetime. Though the membrane is in stark contrast to nearly everything below it, the resort's operators have since made no attempt to conceal it. No blue paint to resemble the sky that surrounds it. No pixel or projection screen to operationalize its resort-wide visibility. The structural membrane, as a final remnant of its former role as a blimp hangar, is decidedly left intact. Intact, that is, except for the 44 transparent ultraviolet-coated PVC panels that were installed to replace the southern section of the membrane's metal structure, allowing a generous amount of sunlight throughout the day. If the sky over Germany lost its color, so too would its interior. Though it is an immunological bubble of the highest technical ability, it still maintains a relationship to the world around it. If the Tropical Islands Resort is a sign of things to come, given the looming volatility of the climate, it is somewhat assured that the future will not be strictly made up of bunkers, nor of bubbles. Chapter 2: The Botanical Spectacle. Between Conservation and Consumption. In the wake of climate change and the contamination of the air, the unintended human occupation of geologic agent has quickly made itself apparent. Nature, that timeless and scaleless concept beyond human comprehension, has recently been given timely and spatial limitations in the clumsy hands of society. Their confluence is most apparent in the history of the greenhouse building type, a site of both botanical protection and spectacle. The first greenhouse was created in 30 AD as a mobile cart for the year-round growth of a cucumber-like vegetable. Moved out into the sun and withdrawn under the cover of frames on wintry days, the first greenhouse was as much about the conservation of nature as its consumption. In the 19th century, the parallel advancements of ironwork and glass production transformed the greenhouse into an interiorized environment against the apparently polluted London atmosphere. Explorers voyaged to faraway countries both colonized and unpopulated, to bring back the seeds of plants only heard about in stories or seen in illustrations. For the first time in history, specimens from around the world could be kept under single, uninterrupted glass roofs for public viewing and close botanical scholarship. By the turn of the 20th century, botanical study and museological pleasure had become the two inseparable roles of greenhouse production. Greenhouse design and the environmental education offered within begin to suggest an appeal to ecological concerns. The list of amenities for the climatron, the world's first air-conditioned greenhouse system built in 1961, reads more like that of an amusement park. Meanwhile, the office interior was imagined as a corporate greenhouse, in an effort to bring nature closer, to give the person who spends most of their time in an office a more habitable environment. In the urban atrium, botanical life was valued for nothing more than the potentials of work productivity. The end of the 20th century was met with the world's largest earth science experiment, with the intention of developing both new methods of botanical conservation and media consumption. 4 men and 4 women were sealed inside Biosphere 2, an 8-story simulation of the Earth's biomes at a scale 39 billion times smaller than its referent. They were regularly interviewed, televised and even put on display for tourists during the 2-year experiment. In the greenhouse building type, nature is most apparently the subject of immense appreciation and the highly resilient plaything of technical intervention. The Tropical Islands Resort is, like nearly every greenhouse preceding it, a celebration of the human triumph over the material world, the insatiable quest for botanical and zoological comprehension, and the tension between human history and natural history that, to this day, continues to be deeply unresolved and in many cases willfully overlooked. The Tropical Islands Resort is a botanical spectacle. The resort's unofficial slogan, "Endless Summer," is featured on many of the souvenirs available at the gift shops. The humidity of the air is the visitor's first clue that the interiorization of an endless summer is the motive of tropical islands, but it is the evergreen palm trees that signify an impossibly sublime setting, far from the capricious climate of Western Europe, in the verdant cradle of all the tropical regions scattered across the globe. The sites it represents no longer bear the stability nor the composure that had always been assumed of them. The Tropical Islands Resort is a shrine to the places deforested to complete its image. A mirage of the places most affected by climate change to support those that shy away from it. The two atmospheres are at apparent odds with one another. The life systems subject to the meteorological atmosphere, the envelope that unites the world as a global exterior, are compromised for the betterment of the aesthetic atmosphere of the architectural interior. Constructed in an era openly aware of the entwinement of human and natural history, the reproduction of the tropics and their fictionally singular climate can be seen as the tipping point in the history of the greenhouse building type. When the exterior environment can no longer maintain the fragility of nature, and must be brought inside, there will no longer be an outside to emulate. Chapter 3. The Culture Condenser. Between History and Nostalgia. Though the many regions of the world have developed rich and distinct cultures of their own over time, artifacts can only reveal a fraction of their essences. However, the Western display of power can, in part, be historicized as the increasingly misguided attempt to disprove this claim. One of the earliest known attempts at world condensing is the 16th-century Cabinet of Curiosities, a collection of worldly objects joined together within a single piece of furniture. The typical curiosity cabinet was held in high esteem by those that owned them, as a microcosm or theater of the world, for its symbolic conveyance of its owner's control of the world through its indoor and microscopic reproduction. As the world was said to have become smaller in the 19th century, the colonially expanding West developed the World's Fair exhibition type, to allow the world's many disparate regions to more easily reveal their cultures and potential prospects to one another under a single roof. The first World's Fair was the Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of All Nations of 1851, held inside an enormous glass building known as the Crystal Palace. The structure successfully recreated the sublimity of gazing over the expanse of an unobstructed horizon within the built interior. The building's impressive size and structural uniformity was a necessary foil to the myriad objects on display within its confines. Though it was held as a universal competition and a glimpse into the near future, the exhibition required a heavy amount of editing in the representation of world cultures. Subsequent World's Fairs continued to invest in the potential future industries of world cultures while also setting their sights on their pasts. The increased popularity of ethnography was on display at the 1893 Columbian Exposition on over 600 acres and divided into interior and exterior spaces. The interiors of the Columbian Exposition were the sites of Western futures, of contemporary architecture and mechanical prototypes shielded by modern engineering, while the exterior spaces were reserved for the exhibition of non-Western cultures, to perform antiquated customs and sell outdated artifacts in the form of an outdoor circus. The future was inside, the past was outdoors, and time and space were both rendered as commodities. As it competed with both the allure of international travel and increasingly immersive media, the World's Fair transitioned into the theme park in the 20th century. As a microcosm within the larger microcosm of the 1964 New York World's Fair, It's a Small World guided more than 10 million visitors through a serpentine parody of the 7 continents. Small World represented a significant shift away from the visible distinction between a Western future of the interior and a non-Western past of the exterior, setting its sights instead on an embedding of novel technology within globally familiar imagery, unified by air conditioning. The Tropical Islands Resort is an imaginary meeting of the world's tropical cultures, thousands of years before the Industrial Revolution and some time after the first human settlement. The Tropical Islands Resort is a culture condenser. Turned towards the past with wings outstretched towards the future, it reproduces the places that have long inspired schools of painting and transcontinental voyages. The Tropical Islands Resort desires to obliterate history and turn it into collective mythology, to dwell within the cabinet of curiosities and the history that never happened. The Tropical Islands Resort adds a new layer of complexity to the interiorization of nostalgia by not only reproducing a fictional space and time but also a climate, as the cyclically predictable and stable weather patterns in the tropics are becoming a figment of the past. While the buildings of tropical regions are undoubtedly distinct from those of more frigid climates, without the snow to whisk away and the below-freezing temperatures to combat, the buildings within the Tropical Islands Resort are competing only with the occasional spike in temperature caused by momentary air conditioning malfunctions. The Tropical Islands Resort revels in the spectacle of its own containment, in the contrast of weathered building materials against the single metal structure overhead, in the illusion of eternal purity. The hotels, restaurants and gift shops, which stylistically refer to regions with parallel but distant histories, are all brought together under a single roof to be given a single identity. Tropical Islands. The choice to name the single building as a plural ecology is a reminder of the grandeur of its own achievement. To condense an idealized world at a scale so immense, and with a climatic system so advanced, that it can be compared to every corner of the earth to which it refers combined. Chapter 4. The Extra-Large Stage Set. Explication and the Architectural Interior as Contemporary Media. The Tropical Islands Resort did not appear out of thin air, nor is it alone in its operations. The main elements on display have each been the subjects of control for thousands of years, and key devices have evolved to become the instruments of control. First by pulling botanical elements out of their seasonal rhythms. Then by amassing a miniature theater of the world. And finally by connecting through division. As these objects were reimagined as architecture, their interiority became a tool for aesthetic mediation from their distant and immediate environments. To bring the temperate to the intemperate. To consolidate the global system of exchange. To incubate the future and mock the past. To respond to our mistakes, by either taking shelter from them or improving the entirety of social construction. To venerate and violate raw materials. To deodorize the scrap heap of history. To embody the estranged. And, finally, to dramatize the incubation of life systems in preparation of their abandonment. As the consequences of climate change, material scarcity and the conflicts of globalization establish aesthetics entirely their own, we inch closer to our baser instincts as we instruct the architectural interior to dig deeper into its primary function as shelter, through a commitment to three essential components. First, under the auspices of the architectural interior, the manipulation of world elements is not only expressed. It is staged. The great mysteries that lie within the compositions of the elements reproduced in the tropical islands resort have been popularly overshadowed by their sensate properties, those qualities which can be most easily apprehended by the naked eye and the wandering mind. In the age of mass consumption, the exquisite and the ineffable have necessarily given way to the apparent and the immediately perceptible. If staging is the method by which commodities stand in for deep-seated, collectively felt phenomena and are put on display, architecture is the stage itself. Second, the staging of world elements is expertly supported by invisible maintenance, embedded within the walls of the perimeter and underfoot. This Baroque ensemble of domestic gadgetry epitomizes the intestinal complexity of gracious living. In other words, this is the junk that keeps the pad swinging. The concealing of maintenance systems is itself an aesthetic practice, as crucial as that which takes center stage. Third, the staging of world elements and their invisible maintenance are both supported by the dome that cradles them. The enveloping structure is a filter, a lens, a border, an incubator, a distinction, a container, and an agent of mediation that makes some things appear and others vanish. The realities of climates, natures and cultures are aesthetically mediated by these three elements in the architectural interior as effectively as other more renowned forms of mediation. While literary, televisual and filmic media famously reveal the essences of world elements as often as they conceal them, the architectural interior has proven itself to stand tall among their ranks. However, the architectural interior has not yet absolutely reached the limits of baser instincts. Although the aesthetics of immunity, consumption and nostalgia seem to be on display at the tropical islands resort without rival, they hang in a balance with their opposing forces. World elements are called into question when their manipulation is as apparent as it is here, in the architectural interior, where they are spectacular precisely because we get the sense this is not where they belong. Let us look to the tropical islands resort as a barometer for the unpredictable future. Will it become the site of a brave new republic, or the gated community of the few and faint-hearted? Will it defend the life systems it has long forsaken, or continue to devour what little there remains? Will it recall more complete histories of the cultures it has parodied, or continue to exploit them until they are reduced to false memories? As we direct our attention to the architectural interior, we will undoubtedly see ourselves in its reflection.